Thank you, Della Leaders Club, and thank you everyone here for coming. Chitra, let's start at the beginning. How did this book come about? There is Murthy, there is Sudha, there's Chitra. Who played Cupid?
Well, I want to echo you in thanking Della Leaders Club for having us here, and I'm really looking forward to our interaction, both us and all of you. Yeah, this book was a surprise. It was not a book I had ever intended to write because, as you all know, I'm a fiction writer, and mostly I write novels. And what I've always loved about writing is imagining and creating a world. So I did not think I was going to write nonfiction, but Chiki Sarkar of Juggernaut came to me and she said, I've been thinking about this book for a long time. I think you would be really good at writing it. How about that? And I said to Chiki, no way. I said, I don't even know how to write a book of nonfiction. But Chiki kept asking me, and then she asked the Murti. She had already asked the Murtis, and they had said no to several other possible writers. But they said yes, they would like me to write this. I was very honored. I'd researched, I knew a little bit about them. I had gone to school with Sudha's sister, brother, many years back in California, at Berkeley, where certain people in this audience also were. And so I knew them a little bit, they knew me a little bit, so there was some, trust factor. And then as I researched their life, and my husband Murthy back there is also very instrumental in getting me to agree to write this book because he said, listen, this is a story that's really worth telling. This is about a time that people are forgetting, and this is a story that can inspire young people who are thinking about, well, how difficult is life for me? Well, for the Murtis, they were truly path-breaking. It was very difficult. So seeing people having gone through so much difficulty gives us a feeling of comfort, a feeling of, I can do it too. So these are all the things I hope that people will get from this book, and that's why I decided to write this book. Was it easy? No, I had to learn how to write this book. But I found that I could use some fictional techniques in it.
Yes, we are coming to that. Yeah. So yes, I think I liked what you said, that it is a story which is from another period, but then it can go forward because the present, so many times, it is the past.
Exactly.
We find it increasingly. And the alchemy and the chemistry between, the subjects, the publisher, between the writer, everything just completely comes through in the book. So I'm so glad it's you who wrote the book.
Thank you so much. And I think I feel very happy because at the end of the day, it is a human story. It is a human story, and it is a love story on many levels. Not just the love between Sudha and Murthy, but
between them and the world.
Them and the world. And in there, how we hear about triangular love stories? Theirs was certainly a triangular love story, with Infosys being the third partner.
Yeah.
Yes.
The mistress.
You could say that.
They're just such an iconic couple. How did you break them down into Narayan and Sudha? At any point, did awe or any other emotion interfere with the storytelling?
Well, I think first, as I was gathering information, yes, I was awed by really the accomplishments of two people who came from very ordinary backgrounds. But I think once I started working on the book, then I had to have objective distance. And then I was really wanting to know their story, especially their untold story, things that they had not talked about, which is why we decided to talk about their early life in this book. Because once Infosys becomes really successful, many people know their story, many people have opinions about their story, but where they came from and how, having come from really very ordinary backgrounds, how did they succeed? And how did they support each other? How did they maybe fight with each other. There are all kinds of nuances. It's a love story, but it's certainly got its ups and downs, and I thought that was the interesting part.
This is a story about so many stories. It's about India, it's about education, about society, about family, about mother tongue, about English, about corporate culture, about computers, about work ethic, and a friendship that went on to become a famous marriage. So, because I've been reading the reviews even before I knew I was going to do this talk with you. I've been so interested in the book. I've been reading the reviews, and they say, okay, like you just said, it's part romance, it's part corporate startup, it is, so many things to so many people, almost like that elephant that people touch everywhere and say, it's this, it's this, it's this. And I can tell you later what it meant to me.
I would love to
whose story
know
I
that.
followed in this with great interest and sometimes tears in my eyes. But I just wanted to ask you, like for you, what one particular thing is this story about? Is there one thing that you can bring it down to?
That's really difficult because for me, this story is so multi-layered, and it is about all those things. Sometimes it's one and sometimes it's another. Sometimes it's about family upbringings and values that we grow up with, which we are so blessed in India because we do have, in many cases, this close connection, not only with our parents, but also our grandparents. And to both of these people, their grandparents were very important. And what they had learned from their grandparents came back to help them at very crucial and difficult moments, especially Sudha. She was very close to her grandmother, both of her grandmothers. So it was about that. But it's also about, a love story, what makes people fall in love. But more important, what makes people stay in love, right? That's something we can all learn a little bit about. And what do you do when your spouse is doing something that you don't agree with? How do you live through that? How can you be supportive in spite of that, right? So those were some things. How do you bring up children in the midst of all of this when one parent is completely absent? What can you draw upon? And Sudhaji really was very smart and drew upon her extended family. And, she actually made them move to Bangalore. And
Brought them all under one roof.
Brought them all under one roof where they all just lived. And so that Akshata would later say, my grandfather was my real dad, Mr. Murthy is my bonus dad.
For me, I think mostly this book is, I was telling Sudhaji also this at JLF, that, it is about so much honesty. Because a lot of, how we see on Insta and everything, people are very much into painting a picture for us, which may or may not be true, which make us envy them a lot. But here you have it kind of warts and all. You have the good, but you have the bad.
And I really wanted to do that.
Yeah, you
That
have
was
the
really
beauty, you
important.
have the ugly. And I think as a writer, you have also very, very consciously kept away from any fairy tale elements into this.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that because I really want to show this couple in their ordinariness so that we can relate to them, so that their story can become meaningful to me, so that I can say, whoa, I can do this too. Or I can read points in their lives and say, I could have done this better. They made mistakes. And
I think
they made wrong decisions.
Yeah. And that being so forthcoming with your errors and your heartbreaks, like you said, even between the couple. And there was just no pretense at sugarcoating or... and I feel the reader sometimes, people underestimate the reader. The reader gets it if he is being conned. And at no point in this book are we conned. We just get kind of the unvarnished truth, whether we like it or not, whether we expect it or not.
Yeah, and that was my purpose. And you said something so important. I know there are people in this audience that were talking to me earlier that are interested in writing their stories, and I really encourage you to do that, even if you're going to write it for yourself. you cannot con the reader. You have to be honest. You have to be honest. Otherwise, something magical goes out of the book, which can only happen when it's kind of an honest conversation between the writer and the reader.
I think maybe before I picked up the book, I thought that, yeah, I knew it would give you the arc, the domestic and the professional arc. But when I read the book, I found that, like you said, the word human, it had a lot of that connecting factor between the reader and the writer and the subjects.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because I was interested. I told them many times, and we did various kinds of interviewing, but the last part was when I came to Bangalore and spent time with them, and I said to them, tell me things that nobody knows. And they did. I felt very honored that they told me funny things and serious things, and sometimes, quite heartbreaking things that they had not talked about before.
Yeah. So, like somebody was asking you earlier, you moved from mythology to such a beautiful slice of the past with independence, and now you've come up with this, which is a close-up of 2 lives. I'm sure the research methods were obviously very different for this, more personal. It was not like just reading a book somewhere. And Mr. Murthy sent you emails.
Yeah. So, I did my own background research. I got facts, I got timelines, I got names of computers, all those things. Whoa, these computers become a real character. They become characters because, especially in the early years, they're like the treasures of ancient tales. They're so hard to get hold of.
There's a place where you've written how somebody fooled Mr. Murthy. They showed him a printer and they said, this is a computer. And he kept staring at it and looked at the paper coming out. And then somebody told him, no, we are just fooling you. That's not a computer.
That's just a printer.
But that's all we knew about computers at one time.
That's true. And only a few institutions had computers, which somehow they got from abroad. It was very, very difficult. Yeah. So, computers are like a big part of this story. They're like, they're characters.
You had your homework cut out
when
it came to computers.
So I was like, because my background is completely not in computers, so, I had to rely on my husband a little bit and on my sons, and then every once in a while, when I was desperate, I'd write to Mr. Murthy, I'd be like, where can I find a photo of this computer? What does it look like? Because I'm very visual, and even to write about computers, I kind of have to see them, right, to understand them. So, So I did all that, and then I sent questions to the Murthys. So we did some email, then we did some Zoom, and the final part was coming and staying with them.
And you stayed with them. So how was that? Tell us what you ate.
I would go to their house in the morning and spend all day, and then late at night, and Murthy was also with me. And I'd just have my recorder on, and it was just conversing. And I think I got a lot out of that, because I wasn't like only asking questions. I was saying to them, what do you remember of this period? What do you remember here? Do you recall when this incident happened that you've told me about? Tell me a little more. Describe it to me. Give me some examples. And as they did that, I kind of began to see them in those scenes. And I could start constructing those scenes in a dramatic way. So that even something like, a very dramatic moment in the book is like, now Infosys, Sudha has given the seed money for Infosys. Now Infosys is just starting. Things are getting better. Okay, they're still looking for a customer. But now, they're starting to, they've gotten ahead. And now Sudha is like, okay, I need to become a formal part of Infosys. And Mr. Murthy says, not going to happen. And she's like, what do you mean? I've done so much for Infosys. So that was a tough moment, and it was tough for them to talk about that. She said
something like, I was so angry, I didn't want to talk when I was angry, so I went into my room and I shut the door the whole night. I just hugged. Akshata was a baby, I think. I just hugged her and slept, but I didn't say anything till morning.
Yeah. she just left her dinner uneaten on the table, and she just went in. And you know, for several days she didn't talk to Mr. Murthy about it. And I think he was understanding, oops, this is not the right move. But you know then what they told me is the ending of that story, which many people did not know about, which is then he went to her and he said, you know, I understand you're very upset, and I recognize something, which is you are better at all of this than the lot of us, you know, all the board of directors, all the founders put together. And so he said, if you really want it, I will hand Infosys over to you, but I can't have it become a family business, you know, husband and wife business, like a lot of businesses he had seen, including businesses that both of them had worked for, where there was a lot of family connection, and therefore it just wasn't professional, it wasn't fair.
Stakeholders won't have that much trust.
Yeah, they wouldn't have trust. They wouldn't see them as professional. He said, I really need this company to be seen as very professional. But he said something really important. And, you know, one thing I learned talking to Mr. Murthy over these things, he doesn't say things that he doesn't believe in or follow through. If he says it, he's willing to follow through. And he said to her, if you want, I'll hand the company to you, because I know you can do the job really well, and I'll take over, you know, getting a secondary income and taking care of the kids. And so she thought about it for several days, because, you know, she didn't want to just jump into an answer. I think she did feel pretty good that he had offered her that, but then she started thinking, and then something her grandmother said came back to her. And her grandmother had told her a long time back, women can do the work of men quite well, but men, you know, they can't always do. So she said to herself, I know I can run Infosys and I can make it a success, but can Murthy take care of the home and the kids? And the answer was no. And so she said, no, you go ahead and run Infosys. I will find something else to do. And then she went into teaching, which was very rewarding for her. And she became a writer, which was even more rewarding. And she headed Infosys Foundation. So 3 things she did that ended up being really probably much more impactful than if she had taken over Infosys.
There was a similar thing when she wanted to do her PhD abroad. And he said that I can give up my career then, and you can do that. And then same situation, and she thought about it.
Yeah.
And then she said, you are my PhD.
Yes, because every once in a while she did have these very romantic lines. So I'll give a little bit of the backstory, which is she had been accepted to MIT, and then one of the professors had offered her a research position, a research assistantship, but she hadn't taken it because she'd just gone and interviewed with Telco and they had offered her a job, right? So, you know, we often think about how Sudha was such a great student, and then she saw this job application which said women need not apply, and she was angry. She wrote to Tata. He sent her an interview appointment. She went, she aced the interview.
And then she says...
And then she joined. Yeah. But we don't know.
No, first she was like, I just wanted them to know that women should be considered, but I didn't want the job.
Right. But people often don't know that part. They know that she was, she joined and became the first woman engineer on the shop floor. Right? And she had a lot of trouble. But they don't know that in between, that when she came back to her father, he showed her this envelope, and it was a letter from MIT. This professor was offering her the assistantship, and she was like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. I'm going to MIT. And her dad just looked at her, and she was very fond of her dad. And he said, just think, if having gotten this job, you don't take it, what is Telco going to do the next time a woman wants to be interviewed? Yeah. Right? She said, you're just closing the door on, you know, many, many women if you do this. And then he said, but you do what you want. Yeah. And then, she thought for a long time. I don't know if it was what she wanted, but she did what she thought was right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm happy you spoke about her dad because, there are the family influence is very, very strong, like you just said. And I feel in Mr. Murthy's case, there was that whole thing about, he was very against unfairness. He was always fighting unfairness. Like, why should a lower middle class man clean the toilets of an upper middle class man? That made no sense to him.
And he was very against caste system and all those things, right? Once he got a really good job offer, and it's in the book, he got a really good job offer with a company, and he was ready to sign. And then he said, I'd like to use the toilet. And they're like, we'll take you to the toilet. And he sees the toilet, and he says, okay, I can go. And they say, no, that is not for our officers. That's for like the lower level employees. And he says, I'm not going to work in a place where you distinguish between upper level and lower level people like this. We are all people. Everyone should be allowed to use the same toilets. So that kind of thinking got him into a lot of trouble. So he didn't take that job. And for a while he was, he had problems because he didn't take that job.
He was very principled. His background and her background were obviously very, very different. The upbringings I'm talking about. Yeah. So in Sudha's case, what I really found very warm and, the emotional side of her was her Aji, who was a midwife at that time, who was a widow, and who had to shave her hair off. And every week the barber used to come and, outside just shave her hair off. And she became a midwife, and she was doing her own thing. And that's when she told Sudha that, a woman can do a man's job and a man cannot do a woman's job.
Exactly.
Yeah. And she was so close to her dad, who influenced a lot of stuff going on in her life, especially because he was also an atheist. So I was just thinking about, there's a writer called Sarah Joseph in Malayalam who's written a book called Odappu. And in Odappu, there's this nun who leaves a nunnery. And the whole society is aghast. The Syrian Christian community is aghast because she's done this. But at some point, somebody tells her that, you did this because your father eggs you on, because your father's on your side. And she says, yeah, like for all successful women, that early friendship with their fathers, like the common denominator. Then there is this politician called K.R. Gauriamma, who passed away recently, again in Kerala, who has also given many interviews on this, that I could do this whole leadership thing because my father believed in me, even when I was very small. Like, I would say, I can't do this, and he would say, of course you can do that. No, I'm a girl, so what? So
that was very similar to Sudha's background.
So do you want to shed some more light on that relationship? Because I do feel a lot of her personality was the way she blossomed, because of the way she blossomed as a little girl.
Yeah, and in fact, the early part of their relationship, they really fall in love because they're telling each other stories about their early lives. And so when Murthy hears about how her father supported her, he is truly like taken aback, and he says, wow, this was not true in my house, that your father never made a distinction between your brother and the three sisters. You got the same education, you got the same freedom. He supported you even when everyone around you was saying, don't let her do this. Like when she joined the engineering college, there were no girls, right? She's the first girl. She had a terrible time. I've written about that in the book, the way she was harassed. But her father stood with her. He stood with her.
This is what you want to do,
do this. Well, he warned her. It's not going to be easy. You're not going to have any friends, So he's like, but if you want to do it, I'll stand by you. But what people sometimes don't know about is, so he's a strong man. All right, Mr. Murthy is also a strong man, so there's quite a bit of between the two of them. There are some tensions, especially in their first meeting. At the end of that meeting, Sudha's dad he's so upset by what he sees in Murthy, or what he thinks he sees, he just walks out of the room and he tells Sudha, this isn't going to happen. And then, Sudha has to work a lot to bring him around.
But even in the end, when he comes back from somewhere and he says, what mom's made for lunch, we'll have it for dinner, let's all go out for lunch. And then they go and call the grandfather, the kids go and call him. And you've written that he was still suspicious of Murthy, but he went for the lunch.
Yes, there was always a little bit of tension.
That's like
much later in life. But the grandchildren just loved their grandfather. So, of course, even he came along on all the family outings, but he would sit at a separate table with Rohan. So these are just like little funny things about them. I think that makes us feel like, they're just like us. Yeah.
You've done a marvelous job of that,
Well, thank
making
you.
us feel like they are like us. There are so many sad moments in this. For me, they were pretty sad.
Yeah, they are.
I especially felt very bad when Murthy's father hit him when he was just 8 years old, I think 8.
Yeah, he's
and his father was sleeping. And he was just playing like a little child along with other children, and he
And
made some
making
noise.
noise,
His
right.
mother had told him, "Shh, Papa's sleeping," or whatever, and he made some noise, and he didn't even know what hit him. Father just came and picked him and threw him across the room, and then he was just like kind of bleeding.
Yeah,
And
he hit his head
yeah.
against a steel trunk, the corner of a steel trunk, and that
Needed
just left
stitches.
it left a scar. His mother was just frantic, and and he tells Sudha this story which he had never told anyone, and then I felt very honored that he shared it for all our readers. And then Sudha was aghast because she had never grown up in a house like that. And she was just staring at him, and he says to her, but that taught me an important lesson. And now Sudha's like, oh my God, what lesson did he learn from this?
He learned a lovely lesson.
Yeah, and he said, I learned never to hit my children, that I would never hit my children. And
a man could have gone either way.
yes. And I thought that was a real, deep moment in the book for me, because we all learn from negative incidents, but, it takes something special to learn a positive lesson from a very painful, negative childhood incident. And so I thought right from there, his thinking was different. Yeah.
And, like you just said, Sudha going into the engineering college, there's no women's toilet. And there is, all these guys would tease her.
Tease
and
her all the
they would
time.
sing songs like...
Really,
Sajan-
sexual harassment.
Yeah,
That's what,
yeah,
there was
yeah.
no name for it at that time, but that's really what it was.
No, they used to call it eve teasing. That
Eve
sounds so
teasing.
nice and gentle. But it was like harassment, yes.
It was harassment, yeah.
And they would sing songs like Sajan re jhoot mat bolo, Sudha ke paas jana hai.
Yeah.
The actual line is Khuda ke paas jana hai.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah. So I just
They'd be from she sat in the back, right? So they'd be throwing things at her, and it was just amazing. It was a different time, but writing about it, I thought, what, the professors didn't do anything? And they didn't, because they didn't want her there either. They never stopped all of this.
She was like an oddity, and she had to just ride that.
And for all the years that she was there, no toilet, no women's toilet. She had to go home every afternoon for break. She would go all the way home, use the toilet, and come back. And you'd think, the administration, they could have done something about
I
it.
think they kind of expected her to drop out.
Yeah, that is what they were.
And they were like,
hoping.
we'll make a toilet and then she will go.
Yeah,
I mean, that's money
I think they
waste
were
for
even
them.
just hoping that
Yeah,
she'd drop out
yeah,
and they'd be
yeah.
back to where they were.
Yeah.
So, you have to give her credit for, breaking a lot of ceilings. And, the ceilings have changed today, but there are still ceilings, and I'm hoping that a lot of women reading this will gain some inspiration Yeah.
No, I just wanted to ask you because these are the some of the anecdotes in that, some of the happenings that touched me. For me, those were very touching. So for you, when you were writing this, because you were also first listening it firsthand and then processing it and then bringing your language to it, the story to it, the literature part of it. So was there any story that when you were reading, not reading, when you were listening to them talk, and there is, like you just said, there is he told her and she told him, where you are kind of trying to be very subtle and out of the picture as a storyteller there. But
And
is
that's
there,
what I tried throughout, like not my,
Yeah.
my evaluation. I didn't want that. I wanted them and the reader just, face to face, as it were.
And like you said many times, like you said about the father hitting incident, you knew that Sudha was also hearing it for the first time.
Yeah.
And like you said, we are privy to it. We are there along with you. We are there, part of the group listening to that.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to ask you: is there any anecdote or story or something touching that you had to go home and you had to process it, and it took you longer because it was really like something that sat in you?
Well, I think that there were a couple of things. And actually, although I loved writing Sudha's part of the book, both of these were Mr. Murthy's. There were three things he told me that he hadn't told people. One was this incident about the childhood violence. And then the second one was about how when they had their first client, right, in the US, Mr. Don Lyles, he was very temperamental. And he would just mistreat them, and especially Murthy, all the time, because, I don't know, he knew he was their only client.
No, all the time, what are you doing?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he had to give like a little report.
Yeah, and that was like minor. But he would also not pay them on time.
Yes.
And, there would be times when Murthy would run out of money. There's a scene in the book where Sudha takes off her jewelry and gives it to the bank for surety. That part.
And also, like, he used to
he
eat
was-
one egg a day.
He-
One egg a day because...
He wouldn't give them money, so, they couldn't eat properly. But the worst thing was that one time when Murthy went there, he said, I'm not going to give you money to stay in a hotel. I have a warehouse, you can sleep in the warehouse. So this warehouse had boxes, and Murthy had to put boxes together and sleep on boxes. And he hadn't talked about that elsewhere, but he told me that he was so upset at this treatment because he remembered, it wasn't how he was brought up, and he was lying there that night remembering how his mother had said to him, the guest is like God, which is a big part of our culture, right? And how sometimes they were not rich, so if suddenly there was a visitor who came, she would just give her food to him. And he's like, Don Lyles has a perfectly good home, and here I am lying on boxes. And when he told Sudha, she was also very upset. But again, he went through the upset, but he also made a decision because he used these hardships to learn something from them. And then that was the moment he decided this man cannot be our main customer, and he certainly can't be our only customer. So he started thinking about how to expand the company in different directions. But that was, quite something for me, just imagining him. And it was a cold night, and he's in the warehouse and just lying on boxes. I'm like, who does that? But it also shows something, which is that was like on the business front, it shows that was a time when the world did not appreciate India. The world did not have respect for Indian entrepreneurs. They thought they could do anything and get away with it. And that's changed. And I think this couple has really had something to do with how other countries view India now. They were at the forefront. Of course, many other wonderful people have come up also, but they were at the forefront of times like that. And then the third thing that I was interested in, I said to Mr. Murthy once, so did you ever cry? Like Sudhaji would tell me, yes, she cried when she went to MIT and she saw what she had given up. She sat on the steps and she cried, and there are other times when she cried, although a lot of times not in front of people. Like when she was going to engineering school, she would often come home and cry at night. She couldn't tell anyone because then her mother would say, all right, let's take you out of that place where you're having so much stress. So I said, did you ever cry? So he told me that especially once when Rohan, their son, he was very naughty. He was always getting into mischief. And once he saw a Superman movie, so then, he got like a little cape, a towel or something, and he jumped off the top of the car and he dislocated his arm and he was in great pain and he was screaming. Sudha had gone to work and Mr. Murthy and Sudha's sister, who was a doctor, thankfully, and helped her a lot, Sunanda, they're taking him to the hospital. And Rohan is crying and Mr. Murthy is holding him and also crying. And when Sunanda saw that, she was like, wow, I thought you were kind of like a robot, but you actually have feelings.
Sudha's father calls him
He
a
called
robot,
him
yeah.
a robot. Yes. The robot has emotions. Yeah. All right, so I have to tell you a really funny story, which shows Mr. Murthy again in a different light. So it also shows some of the things that he had to give up. So, Rohan is born, but immediately Mr. Murthy has to go abroad with Don Lyles is giving a hard time, and he doesn't come back for like 3 months. He has to be in the US. Okay. So meanwhile, Sudha's sister who was abroad has come back, and she has a little baby, Pavan, and Sudha has a little baby, Rohan, and they're about the same age. And they dress the two of them exactly alike, and they say to Mr. Murthy has come, and they say to Murthy ji, which one is your son? And with Mr. Murthy, quite confidently, he knows that one of them is a little older, so he points to, using that, he points to one and says, this one, and of course it's the wrong one. And then the rest of the sister Jayashree's vacation, they just make fun of him. And of course the father-in-law's like, yeah, everyone's very amused. But those are like little funny things. And he was very good-natured, Mr. Murthy. He's like, yes, I made a mistake. But it also shows something, which is he missed so much of the children's childhood, And it shows what entrepreneurs do give up. I mean, I think all of us with careers, all of you in this room, know that there's always a balancing act. Yeah. And you see that with him, and you see that with her. A moment that I really felt strongly about is when Mr. Murthy is going to start his business. He started. So Sudha has to work to make enough money to put into the business and also to just run their household. And Akshata is just a little baby. She's still breastfeeding Akshata. And she realizes that she can't do everything. And she realizes that she has to leave Akshata with her mother in Hubli, right? Yeah. And she's just crying and crying as she's leaving the child. And in fact, Akshata will remain in Hubli for a long time so that she doesn't even know that Sudha is her mom. She thinks Sudha's mother is her mom. And that's tough, That's really tough for a mother. Yeah.
This is something that a lot of people asked me, and I felt it even before they asked me. Why are there no photographs in this book? Because there are so many descriptions of their times, and especially where you say Sudha was short-haired and wore trousers. I wanted to see that picture, and I did. I riffled through the book like twice. And I thought, no, this can't be. There are no pictures. How come there are no pictures?
Well, I think that was a decision that the publisher and the Murthys made. They did not want pictures. And when they told me this, at first I was like, wait, we have to have pictures. But then I was like, okay, I will create the word pictures. And, that'll be important. And I think they felt that there were pictures like floating around on the internet, and they just wanted this the book to focus on the words, and really they felt that maybe that would be better, than just putting pictures. Yeah.
I really miss that.
You should tell the publisher. You should say second
Yes,
edition.
second
Get
edition.
some
Some
photos
pictures,
in
like
there.
some pictures.
And especially there are some very cute pictures of their marriage when she has short hair and everything. Yeah.
Chitra, would you like to just read something for us?
Okay. Do you have a passage in mind that you would like me to read?
I think everything that we referred to, no.
Okay. All right.
I think something.
Let me try. Let me find. It'll take me a minute, so maybe you can entertain the audience.
Okay, then this is just my comment about the book. But I just felt, a lot of people use this word unputdownable when it comes to books. But those books are not really unputdownable. You can put them down and you can pick them up again. It's just a cliche thing to say. They're pretty putdownable. Like if it's a short story collection between two short stories, you can put the book down, pick it up later. But this book, I really found it unputdownable. And it's a biography. So there's no suspense, there's no murder, there's no comedy, it's not full of punchlines. So there is something like an emotional cliffhanger that keeps you going. And I just felt that Chitra has done, she's kind of written it in such a way that it's very visual in our head. It's like a movie, And I think one of the things that I felt that she brought to the book to make it appear like a movie sequence running across our head is that the dialogues are very, very real. You would really feel like that is what Murthy would have told Sudha, and that is what Sudha would have told Murthy. Like, for instance, I was telling you about the PhD thing. She said, "You are my PhD." That stayed in my mind. And the other thing is, one day she told him, "I like you because you remind me of my grandpa." And he said, "I like you because you don't remind me of anyone. You're so unique. You're so different." That's what I like about you. Yeah.
Okay. I think, wait, let me.
And also one little saying that Sudha Murthy has put into the book is, I will make as much sambar as there is masala.
Yes. How much masala?
How much masala, that much sambar.
I'm still looking.
Okay.
So sorry, I didn't think you were going to ask me. All right,
No.
I'm going to read from the beginning.
Okay.
Read from the beginning.
All right. And everybody, please think up what question do you want to ask her. Ask Chitra.
So this is their first meeting. I'll just read about their first meeting. So she's now working at Telco. And every morning Telco picks up the employees on their Telco bus. And there's a guy who sits next to her. His name is Prasanna. He's also Kannada, so they become friends. And Prasanna is always reading a book. And usually, Sudha's a good reader, so it's a book that she knows. But now, suddenly, Prasanna is reading books that she's never heard about, and they're by strange, names like Mikesh and whatever. And she's like, yes, and she's like, where did you get, are these your books? So he shows her the flap, the first page, and it's always Narayan Murthy, and then the place where he bought it, and there are various cities in Europe, and she asks, who is this Narayan Murthy? Is he a global bus conductor? And then Prasanna said, no, he's my roommate. You can come and I'll introduce you. And Sudha's like, no, because she's, being the only woman, she's very careful, observing boundaries. She doesn't go to guys' houses. And then Prasanna says, he has a whole bookcase. It fills up the room, and it's filled with books like this. And Sudha just loves books. So now she's really tempted, and she agrees to go. And she's imagining, what would he look like? And in her mind, she imagined this intrepid world traveler to be suave and debonair, tall and broad-shouldered. Maybe, she thought, because she loved Hindi movies, he would look like Rajesh Khanna, sporting sideburns and boots. So she goes. When she walked into Prasanna's flat, though, she was surprised by the man her co-worker introduced her to. He was thin and slight, with thick glasses and a small scar on his forehead, a far cry from a movie star. He had on a checked coat that was nothing like the fashionable leather jackets the heroes of Hindi movies favored. He was quiet, almost shy, until they started discussing books. Then he shed his reticence and sparkled with intelligence and an eloquence that startled her. So then they start talking about books, and she gets very interested, and then at the end of the evening he plays the trump card. He brings a big grocery bag, and he says, "You can borrow as many books as you want." And then he says, "Can I take you to dinner the next day?" So Mr. Murthy knew what he was doing, and that's how they meet. And then and she said, usually she wouldn't say yes to anyone, but she couldn't say no to him. And she says, "Okay, I'll go, but Prasanna must also come with us. And I will pay for my own dinner." She doesn't want it to be like a date. And she chooses a very unromantic venue, the Pune Coffee House, which was, inexpensive, unpretentious. Students went there all the time. And it was not the kind of restaurant you went to with romance in mind. And he agrees to everything. And then the next night, he told me that he showed up outside Pune Coffee House half an hour early and just waited there for her. So I just thought that was, quite charming how. And so, he falls in love with her right away. She takes a while. It takes her a while.
So even when he proposes to her, he says some very state thing, like, I'm short, I'm this, I'm that.
Yes. And you're so beautiful.
You shouldn't be marrying me, but I want to marry you.
But I want to marry you. Yeah. And I think that's kind of, in a strange way, that makes her fall in love with him, because he's so unpretentious. Yeah. And he does all kinds of weird things. He proposes to her in an auto rickshaw. And, so Sudha said, and the auto rickshaw man stops driving because he wants to hear. Because that part I didn't tell her. She told me later. But because that's where he's giving that speech, "I'm not handsome, you're so beautiful, but I still want you to marry me." Yeah. So there are just some charming moments like that. Yeah.
So whatever you want us to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is mine.
What was their reaction when they read the book?
Yeah. They were really pleased with the book. And Mr. Murthy, who had read Palace of Illusions, he was particularly pleased, and he said, "Wow, you have made us into, the hero and heroine of this book." And, they were pretty pleased. Now, we went back several times because I showed them the manuscript, and I said, "Are there things that you want to add?" And so, delete, they had talked about the fact that they wanted this book to be about them and their immediate family, and it was not going to be about other people in their lives unless it was very, like Don Lyle's, it was very connected to how they felt, what decisions they made. So, we had set some parameters. So, then they were pretty happy. They were pretty happy with it. We went back and forth a couple of times. They wanted to add certain things. Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask that all your earlier books have a very strong female protagonist. So did you feel that in this one also that you leaned more towards Sudha's story than Murthy's?
Just between you and me, I think I leaned a little more towards her, because I could really feel, as a mother, I could really feel a lot of the things that she felt, and also to be left with the children. You know, Mr. Murthy would be gone for months, and, you know, just to deal with that and the loneliness. She talked a lot about that loneliness, and I think I really felt that. But also I felt, because she's a writer, I could relate to that, and how she became a writer. That it was a very difficult time in her life. She had just given birth to Rohan. Mr. Murthy was running around everywhere. And Rohan was, you know, he had very bad allergies when he was born, so he couldn't have his shots. And so she was quarantined for over a year in a little room in her parents' house. But she used that time to write books, and that's how she became a writer. But she also describes, and I put it in the book, how claustrophobic she felt. She felt like, here I worked so hard and earned my engineering degree, and I did all these things, and now I'm just stuck, you know, what's my life? It was a really low point in her life, but she turned it around and she started writing. And I think I really related to those things. I mean, I was very fond of many of the things that Mr. Murthy told me about, but I think as a woman, and as a woman who focuses on women's challenges, I could really relate to Sudha a lot.
And I just wanted to ask you as to how do you do the research bit, considering your earliest stories are so full of imagination and great description. So when you have to write a biography and stick to the facts, is it a very different format and a different
It was different. But I learned that, you know, I could describe all the things that I was telling you about, because there's so many incidents there. And some of them are very describable, like the way the guys in Sudha's class would, you know, tease her or give her a hard time. Like she told me, and that I described it in the book, they're quite dramatic. She comes into the college the very first day, and she liked wearing white saris. And and she's been assigned the front bench. And she comes there, and they've poured ink all over the front bench. And, you know, she's like, she looks at it and she's at the point of tears. She's like, you know, she's just a teenager, right? And she has to tear out some paper. She has to find some paper and then wipe that bench. And she has to sit there because that's the only bench she's allowed to sit on. So, you know, I think there was a lot that I could be descriptive about, because they do have some very dramatic things that have happened to them. There's a point in Mr. Murthy's part of the story where, as someone who worked in Europe, every summer he would just go backpacking across Europe, and when he goes into Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain, something happens where he's thrown into prison. And it's just this, he describes this little concrete room without any windows, and it's winter, and they just throw him there. There's nothing warm, there's not even a blanket, they don't give him food, they don't give him anything to drink. And he described that for me. I was feeling scared for him just as he was telling me. And he thought, I'm going to die here, and my family won't even know what happened to me. So there are very dramatic moments. And then as he lies there, he says, well, you know, he used to be very like socialist, communist. And after this incident, he says, I realized that common people had no rights, you know. Anything could happen to them, and he started changing to his philosophy. So there are some, I didn't have to make up anything. I was able to, they gave me dramatic moments, although sometimes I had to ask them, but tell me what you were feeling, because they would sometimes just give me, well, this happened. So I had to ask Mr. Murthy, tell me what you were feeling as you were lying there on the concrete, shivering and, hungry. So, yeah. Yes? If you just, yes, I see a hand there.
Hi, Chitta, this is Namrata. We've been in touch, yeah.
Yes, hi.
So, it's amazing to hear so much about them. So I have two questions. One is, what is it that kept that bond alive between them?
What was it that despite everything, there was that bond? The second thing I want to ask you is that where is that love gone today?
Yeah. So one of the things, wait, let me pause a little bit and ask you to explain the second part of your question.
I don't see that in new couples today. I don't see that wanting to be there for each other beyond circumstances. It's so easy to just say, I quit. That's like the easiest route out, and you hear it so often. They don't even want to give it 2 years. Quit is in 6 months. So I just really wonder what has changed.
Yeah, that second part I would love to hear from people in the audience, especially maybe the younger generation. I think what kept them going was, first of all, they really respected each other. And they were friends before they got married. They knew each other for several years before they got married. So I think they got to see each other's negative sides also. They could see, Sudha could see that Murthy is very stubborn. He's not going to change his mind about things. And he could see that, she believed in certain things. She was very anti-communist, etc. And they were not going to agree about these things. Her family didn't really like him. These were all problems. They worked through those even before they got married. So I think in some ways you have to be friends with your spouse. And they were always friends. And they also learned about each other. They told each other their life stories, including things they hadn't told each other. So there was a real trust between them. And there was a friendship, there was a trust. And there was a sense that they would support each other. They had each other's backs, that even when things were not good, we will support each other. We'll hold hands. And Sudha once said something which, when she told me, I thought it was so wonderful. I immediately wrote it down to put it in the book. One time when, Infosys was not doing so well, and Sudha, and he was like, well, what should I do? So she says, you be the trapeze artist. You be the acrobat, and I'll be your safety net. Right? And, I thought that was an amazing thing to say. And he did that for her too. So they switched roles from time to time. When there was a point where she said, look, you got to give me space, time, and opportunity so I can go get a different career now. I can't go back to engineering, but I want to do something. And then she becomes a professor here in Bangalore, right? She teaches at a couple of different places, one after the other. And he said, yes, you go do it. That time in MIT when she's crying because she's given up this opportunity, he says, I'm willing to give up my entrepreneurial dream. I'll take up a job, I'll get a salary, so I can pay for you to go to MIT. So, I think they were both willing to give up things for each other. And, that's something special. They did have a lot of respect for each other. And they didn't expect each other to change. So, because there's a time early when Infosys is just being formed, and Mr. Murthy, who was never very business-like, he gives a lot of equity to the other co-founders who are much more junior to him. And really, he had taught them everything they knew. He was continuing to teach them. And he's giving away all this equity. So family members who come to know of this or close friends, they're like, wow, what is he doing? Sudha, stop him from doing this. He's just, he's not okay. And Sudha said something very interesting. She has these little sayings. So she said, well, I know that that's the kind of man he is. Now, when you plant a mango tree, can you expect apples from it? And I thought that was... So I think there are expectations. I think a lot of times when our relationships don't work out, it's because we don't have each other's backs, and that we have expectations of people. We want them to change. we're not willing to have them be the people they are, right? So maybe that is it. Don't be mistaken to think that they didn't have their hard times. They had their hard times. They did fight, and they are human and flawed at times. And, you know, I wanted to point that out in the book, that they're by no means perfect people, but we can learn from them. We can still learn from them.
And I
Yeah.
think the clue to your answer lies in the very last line of the book.
Are we going to give them that last line?
They have to buy the book.
Okay. I can't argue with that.
From what it looks, I think one thing which I can say about this entire thing is the uncommon love had a common bond. And that bond was of principles, if you go back and see.
Yes, I agree.
So it comes back to the law of attraction, like attracts like. So she found in him a person who was principled, who would not do anything wrong. And he found that, and he was stubborn enough for that. And similarly, she was stubborn enough to reject an MIT just because she's already said yes for Tata Motors. So somewhere down, both strong personalities found that they share a common bond of principles and a common respect, that they will not back out from their commitment to each other.
I think that's a very good point you made. Yeah, they did have those principles. And I think there was another thing. Today I went to see Mr. Murthy, and I was just chatting with him. I went to see them. And we were talking about how, he was talking about how they live very simply. They live in a very simple house here in Bangalore. You would never think it belongs to anyone special. And he was saying how one of the things that he and Sudha had in common was that money didn't matter to them. And, that's a big commonality, because let's say money didn't matter to you, but it mattered a lot to your spouse. There would be constant, friction about that. But they both were like, money is not that important to us. And, that's something special, especially in our lifestyles today, what we see around. Money wasn't special to them. Having expensive things was not special to them. It just wasn't. They didn't think that that's some great quality to have. They said, we grew up simple. We would feel uncomfortable if we lived a very lavish lifestyle. So
that brings me to a point where Namrata was saying about today's generation, right? I think simplicity is confused with weakness. And I think, to a large extent, if you're talking about the generation that's mothers today, their mothers were us, right? And in a generation, especially, I see that a lot across the globe, is that we mothers were not principled enough to show to the child that, it's all right not to have things and not to collect things and not to. So one of the things that I think comes through across their life, if you look at it, is that simplicity is what they stand for. It's not something it's not something that they're trying to be, but that's who they stand for. And with that comes a lot of complexity of life gets simplified when you are that way, right? And so if it was easy for you to write honestly about them, is because they live an honest life, right?
True. I never felt I
haven't read
had
the
to.
book, so yeah. But
I never felt I had to whitewash anything or sugarcoat anything, and I wasn't going to. And what you said is so true. Now, they had a hard time, Sudha especially, bringing up children, because often she had to tell children, no, you should not get this. And especially as the company became more successful, the children would ask, why can't we get this? All our classmates have this. Why can't I have a big birthday party? It was very hard for Sudha to try and explain why And, she did various things which I think are useful for parents to look at that section of the book. But yeah, it's a real challenge. When you have money to live simply, it's a real
Principled
challenge.
parenting in general is just something that needs to be retaught in societies today, because I think we've mixed it up, the roles, and this sort of book definitely helps. I haven't read it, but yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, she had a hard time, especially with Rohan. He would question everything. Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? It's not easy. It's yeah. When
Because she herself was in a tough situation with fears, she was able to relate to, be able to tell her children that it's all right to be different, right? If you've grown up being different all the time, it's easier for you to pass on that value. And that is what we, I think, as women, as mothers, need to be okay with. It's okay to be different. It's okay to be a mother. You were asking me earlier how many children I have, and it doesn't. If you have a family, it doesn't have to compromise what you want out of your life. Is a very strong message that she lives through, and a lot of us women who've made it through should also be able to pass on to our children.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one thing to that. Sometimes it is not easy to do that, and we see this in these people's lives. But what happens is sometimes we try, and when it's difficult, we just give up. We're trying to bring up our children in a certain way, but there's so much pressure, we're like, okay. But that's where Sudha really stuck to it. And she didn't mind. Well, on some level she must have minded, but she didn't mind if the children were upset with her. They stopped talking to her. And there was a time when Akshata wanted a special dress because a school play was going on, and she said no. And Akshata was very upset. She didn't talk to her mom. A lot of times we don't want as parents to deal with that pressure of being disliked by our children.
But tough love is real love, right? So, that is what being true to what you want to do is all about, right? Yeah.
But tough love is tough,
It's
too.
tough, yes.
It's tough, too. Wait till...
Yeah. She said this on the Kapil Sharma show where she was going to London and they asked her your address in London. She wrote 10 Downing Street. And that guy is looking at her and telling her, you must be joking. She's saying, no, it is my son-in-law's house.
I know, that was kind of funny.
Too funny. I thought it was too cute the way, and she didn't look like she went to 10 Downing Street, right?
Really, yeah, exactly.
I thought that was really cute.
I think everybody has to tell their own story because they are their own best narrators. If I wrote Chitra's story or Chitra wrote my story, it would be different from me telling my story and her telling her story. So I think everybody has a story in them. It's their story, and they should find a medium to say it. It doesn't have to be words. Sometimes it can be just a drawing or a mime. It can be wordless. It can be with silence. But it's their self-expression, and it's for them to look at the word count. I do feel that every story comes with its own word count. We can't stretch a story. We can't abbreviate a story. A story has to be told in the way that story wants to be told.
Perfectly put up, ma'am. We'd like to hear from you, Chitra, ma'am.
Yeah, I think what you were saying is truly meaningful. I would add that if you are interested in telling your story, don't put it off, because we forget so much. So you want to really write it right now. And you would be amazed at how many, sometimes we think, oh, my life isn't worth a story, but you'll be amazed at how many people might find your story inspiring, because it's not just success that inspires us. Sometimes it's hardship and failure that inspires us too. So I recommend for everyone to start writing their story. Maybe, for some people to think of a whole book is kind of intimidating, but just little snippets, and you will be amazed at how many people really would love to read that story. So I recommend that. To do that, I recommend a couple of things. One is give yourself some time to remember. You know, sometimes we feel we've forgotten a lot, and we have, but it's not gone. If we give ourselves some time and some silence and sit there with our favorite form of expression, whether writing, whether it's a notebook, or whether it's your computer, or, you know, for younger people, their cell phones can be their writing tool, you will be surprised at how much starts coming back to you, you know. Really, even with writing this, a lot came back to the Murtis, which they thought they had completely forgotten. And when I've written about family members, etc., especially my grandfather, who was like a big hero to me, once I started writing about him, I started remembering a lot of things. So at the very least, it is an opportunity to look back over our lives and us to learn from that amazing experience. You know, there's so much to learn. And it's not like the end of the story. What we learn as we write about our lives can help us as we continue to live our lives. And for those who have children, it's a great legacy. You would be amazed at how interested children are in the lives of their parents. I mean, the Murti's children were like just completely fascinated by their stories, and you know, they were often very touched by parts of their parents' lives they did not know. They said, "We didn't know you were like this," and that's true of everyone here. So I recommend that you all start writing.